Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Be Informed session. My name is Carl Hariwala, and I founded Be Informed to help people make good decisions. And before I proceed, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting today and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Before I continue, I'd like to make a note that this session is being recorded, so it will be made available to everyone through our YouTube channel following the session. Feel free to share around the link so family and friends can also view the recording at their leisure. Today's session is being recorded in Australia and is based on principles from an Australian point of view. So please bear that in mind. And if anything is mentioned throughout this session that is relevant to a particular point in time, please bear that in mind for the future as things may change. So it's a point of time session. So if you have any further sort of queries or considerations, please consider those for the future. And from a currency of information perspective, the information presented in this session is current as of this month. So if anything happens to touch on matters that might change in the future, please do bear that in mind. From a housekeeping perspective, if you have any questions, please raise them in the chat function. That will come straight through to me. And then once I receive those questions, I will then ask Estelle during Q&A, and she can answer those questions accordingly. And following the session, I'll also be sending out a one-page handout which Estelle has kindly prepared. So all registered participants will receive that email following the session. And I think that's probably about it. Estelle, I'll hand over to you and we can get straight into it.
Thank you, Carl. And congratulations to those participants who are investing in yourselves to make better decisions for your own life. Yes, I feel very privileged to have this opportunity to speak to you, and I've titled this session, Retirement, Ready or Not? And my aim is to resource you to whether you have an impending retirement or whether you've been forced into an early retirement, but it can be challenging. And in this session, I will address it's not just about the money, some changes to expect, the resources that Australian research shows that you require for a successful retirement, and the importance of social connections. Recently, I came across a photograph, a black and white photo of my paternal grandparents. It was taken at my older brother's wedding in Perth in 1963, and my grandparents were in their mid-60s at the time. It made me think about their retirement and how things have changed. Their retirement, now, they were farmers and they had lived in humble farm cottages over their working life. Thanks, Carl, for catching up with the slide. Now, when it came to their retirement, they sold the farm because they needed a retirement income. There was no superannuation or retirement savings on a national scale in 1963 in Australia. And they sold the farm. My grandmother was a feisty lady and she'd lived in a humble farm cottage all her life and she wasn't going to have that for her retirement. So they sold the farm to have a retirement income and they built a nice brick and tile home in the seaside town of Busselton. So they provided for themselves and they died in their early 70s. Coming to Perth for my brother's wedding would have been a major event in their retirement life. It seems to be so different today. We live longer and we live in a very healthy way for longer. It used to be the government or the boss that told you when it was time to retire, and 65 years was the standard age at which most people retired. But nowadays, we choose when we want to retire. There are still that proportion of retirees, though, who are unexpectedly take a retirement through ill health or injury. But there are very few professions now where you are forced to retire at a certain age. The judiciary, it varies from state to state in Australia, but they have a set retirement age, and I believe the military has some set retirement ages. But retirement is now very much an individual choice for Australians. A big change also was the introduction of this compulsory superannuation in the 1990s. It lessened the concern around having a retirement income. In the late 1980s, Paul Keating was the Treasurer of Australia, and with the Prime Minister, Bob Hawke, they investigated the retirement income situation. And they could see that generations further down the track, there was going to be this huge wave of baby boomers coming, and that the national budget could not necessarily accommodate a payment for people not to turn up to work. So compulsory superannuation was introduced, and that's changed the whole landscape for retirement here in Australia. And in fact, we know now that there's that whole industry set up around saving for your retirement. Thanks very much, Carl. The next slide, please. The money is important, but it's not everything in planning for your retirement. In the latest edition of the Money magazine, June 2023, on the front cover, the heading is 260K to retire, get the pension and super. In Australia, we know that the retirement age to access the pension is being pushed out. And that can impact some people. But if you're planning your retirement, you set yourself a date and you stick to it. And it's the value that you put in the way you live your life, that you used to, all those hours that you used to spend at work. So the money does come into it, but it's not the whole picture, which is what I hope that you will take away with you tonight. So how will you fill those 40 plus hours that you used to spend at work? That's part of the planning. And when you do retire, people will see you differently. They will, they'll look at the grey hair or the wrinkles, or if you're out socially, they'll say, oh, what do you do? And when you say that you are retired, they might think, oh, how dull, how boring, nothing to contribute. That is so far from the truth. So you might have grey hair and you might have wrinkles, but you are still that same person, whether you're a pre-retiree or you are retired. You have a vast knowledge and a life experience. And the trick for you is to work out now, how are you going to use that knowledge and experience that you already have to create a new purpose for when you are retired. And I'll share with you a story about a person, Nan Ives. Now, Nan Ives was a person, she worked in the finance industry for 27 years, and she helped people to create their retirement savings. And she thought that when it came to her turn to retire, that she would be all over this retirement business because she worked with it every day. But when it came to Nan's turn to retire, it didn't turn out that way for her. So she wrote earlier this year, put a message out to the world saying, that before you retire, realize that it's not just about the money. Realize that you are going to be seen differently, and very importantly, create a non-work or non-business network before you retire. You think about when you leave the workforce, you are no longer going to be chatting to those same adult people near the photocopier, meeting them down the hallway or over the lunch table. So you're going to have to work more diligently to keep in touch with the people that you know through your work. And you need to work a little bit harder at creating new social connections. So that's the advice from Nan Ives, is that, you know, you need to do this work before you retire. And of course, think about the things that you might like to do in that extra time that you're going to have every week. I think of Rob, a retiree, that he took early retirement for health reasons, and he bought himself woodworking machinery, and he has made the most beautiful chess sets. Asked him how much would he charge for one of those, and he said it's priceless because it's made with love. So yeah, thanks, Carl. Let's move on to the next slide. Yeah, I mentioned change, and it's a very personal change that you will look forward to when you are moving from the workforce to whether it be semi-retirement or full retirement. And did you know that retirement is listed in the top 10 of stressful life events? A couple of psychologists, Holmes and Ray, they devised this scale. They looked at life and allotted points to the life events that we experience. And coming up to retirement, you have probably experienced one or more of these stressful life events. And the most stressful life event that we go through is the death of a spouse, an intimate partner. And then comes divorce, and followed by separation. If we get sent to jail, that creates stress. If we have the death of a close family member, and especially as an adult, if you've lost a child, that's a very stressful event. And next on the Holmes and Ray scale comes personal illness or injury, and this certainly can impact retirement plans. Now, marriage is on the stressful life event scale. That's a great thing to do, but it can be stressful adjusting to having a marriage. If you lose your job, that will certainly impact your retirement plans. And then ninth in our top 10 is marriage reconciliation. And number 10 is retirement. Now, I found that really surprising when I first learnt that, because I thought, wow, this is a time of life that we really look forward to. But yeah, that's a fact. It can be stressful. And why can it be stressful? It's to do with the fact that there are changes in our identity and our sense of personal security. So, you know, we have worked for decades, and we've been, you know, a bookkeeper, we've been a nurse, we've been a marketing manager, we might have had career changes, but who will you be in retirement is a question that you could ask yourself before you retire. And when it comes to that sense of security, mostly people worry about the money aspect of retirement. You're no longer getting a regular salary. You will get a regular retirement income payment, but how are you going to adjust to that? So that's part of this transition from being in a workplace to being semi-retired or full retirement. It's a journey that you can choose for yourself. So what happens when we go through a change or a transition? Now, usually there are 3 stages in a transition at any stage of life, and this happens later in life when we've already experienced some of those stressful events. So there's the first stage, which is the long goodbye. It's letting go of that profession or that person or that possession. It happens again when people downsize later on in retirement. You have that long goodbye, saying goodbye to something that has been familiar and personal to you for a long time. And in any transition, after we get part of the long goodbye under our belt, we then go through a stage which is called the messy middle, because this is where the emotions come in. There's a lot of chaos going on inside us, and we're not quite sure how this is going to turn out for us. So it can be, stressful, not knowing how it's going to turn out for you. So that's why we say it's an emotional journey. And I've put there that hopefully it lasts a long time. Yeah, if you look after yourself you are going to have in the ability to enjoy the retirement that you are planning. And that's the thing that I see. I'm semi-retired, and I think it's the most wonderful stage of life. There's so much freedom and flexibility. So that's something to look forward to, despite all the changes that you will experience on the journey through. Thanks, Carl. If we can have the next slide. Now, this is something to remember, and it backs up that notion that it's more than just about the money, because this is Australian research. This was done over a decade ago by a Professor Joanne Earle and her associates. At the time, Joanne Earle was at the University of New South Wales in the Department of Psychology, but she still maintains that these are the 6 resources that we need for a successful retirement. Money and health are always the first 2 resources that we need for a successful retirement. And we're pretty fortunate here in Australia in that we live in a country which has, it's in the top 5 countries for retirement security in terms of finances and retirement security in terms of health. And you will probably understand that in Australia, our retirement income has 3 pillars. We have the age pension, which that the government is pushing up the age at which you are able to access that. They're encouraging you to keep working longer. That's one of the pillars of retirement income in Australia. The other is your superannuation from your compulsory savings. And we've had that now for 30 plus years. And we find the people who look after our superannuation and do all the investing for us, the financial gurus, they have coined a new term here in Australia. It's called risk regret. And what they've discovered is that this is up in the 80 years plus cohort of our population. They are finding that people in that age bracket have more than sufficient money for their everyday living. and that they are regretting the fact that they didn't spend more of their retirement savings early in their retirement, that they didn't do that world trip or undertake that special project. And now when they're older and they're not quite as mobile as they used to be, they're regretting the fact that they didn't do that. So that's the outcome of having compulsory superannuation. And then the third pillar in our retirement income system are our voluntary savings. You might have a share portfolio or a property portfolio or collect artworks, whatever it is. So money dictates whether you do have that modest retirement or the comfortable retirement, but we don't need more than $3 million in our superannuation accounts to have a good retirement. Your health. You've all heard the messages about eating the right food, the fresh food, and exercising. And mental health is especially important, and that connects us to social connections. So these 6 resources are all interconnected and they all underpin each other. Mental health is very important, especially after we leave the workplace, and that our social connections become ever more important. The next thing that we require for a successful retirement is to be able to manage our emotions. We just have emotions in us. They are just there. And, you know, they're not bad or they're not better, but we really do need to be able to express them in a healthy way. When we think of emotions, the most common ones, which we can label easily, are the sad, the mad, the bad, and the glad. But often people have a bit of a problem with managing expressing those emotions in a really healthy way. And I'll tell you about a person I helped called Gary the golfer. When we get to him, I'll talk a little bit about what was happening inside him. But a little tip here about being able to express your emotion, find a label, lots of other words that mean the same as sad or glad, and be able to say, today I am feeling really mad at you because you forgot to put the bins out last night. Being able to say it, because if we bottle it up and bottle it up, boom, it tends to explode, and that's not good for the people that you live with. So, and being aware, I remember sitting with a gentleman talking, we were working together, and he had told me that he was not an emotional person. And anyway, the conversation continued, and what happened in the end was I asked him, I said, oh, well, tell me, what was going on inside you when, let's say, when your children were born? And he explained how he and his wife were so happy and so glad. And then I said, well, what about when your grandchildren were born? Oh, well, that was different, because what was going on inside me then was I was thinking, wow, I'm a grandparent now, and I want to leave a legacy for these grandchildren. So he was planning ways that he can leave a legacy for his grandchildren. And then I asked him, I said, and what about when you were made redundant? What was going on inside you then? And his whole expression changed. And it was very easy to see that he was still feeling that anger and resentment about being made redundant after 40 years of faithful service to a company. He had never really expressed it, but those emotions were still there inside him. Your cognitive ability. Now, as we begin to age, we begin to worry about our degeneration of cognitive ability. We're all a bit frightened of ending up with Alzheimer's or dementia. And there are little tricks and ways that we can hopefully keep that at bay. You know, continue to do the crosswords, continue to do the maths puzzles, but at the same time, give yourself permission to take a bit of time out and think clearly about those other issues that come in, those issues from the top 10 stressful events. Like, how are you going to face that issue if you are made redundant? How are you going to face that issue if you, your family, if you lose a close family member? There used to be an old-fashioned expression. We used to say, oh, look, I think I'll sleep on that. And that is still a good piece of advice to follow. You know, give yourself some clear thinking space to nut out, how am I going to tackle this issue that we are dealing with now? And, you know, even those simple tactics like writing down, like if you're not sure about, is now the time for me to retire or not? Sit down and write a list of the pros and the cons. What are the good reasons why I should retire now? What are the not so good reasons that I should retire? So that's your ability to solve problems, is your cognitive ability. And the sixth resource is that level of motivation that you have. So are you like the dog with the bone and you're never going to give up? Or do you easily hand the issue over to someone else? So how likely will it be if you move from the workforce into retirement? How likely is it truly going to be that you're going to be motivated enough to get out of bed on these cold mornings, get out there and join the walking group that meets every Tuesday morning? Let's be realistic. And how motivated are you to improve your health, whether it be to change your diet or to do something about your mental health, if that's an issue that you are dealing with? So research continually shows that these are resources that we need to be aware of and to access to have a plan for a successful retirement. And I've talked about them in the one-page handout. Now, as I said, these are all connected to each other, and remember that we are all unique, and we make this transformation from the workplace into retirement. It's an individual journey of your choices and your decisions. And I just ask you, though, to consider the people that you share your life with and bring them into the conversation as well. So, Carl, if we can have the last slide, thanks. Yeah, and look, I seem to be really emphasising this importance of social connection, and I am doing that because, as you are more than aware, there is a bit of an epidemic of loneliness that the whole world, or especially the developed world, seems to be suffering. And once again, living in Australia, we are so fortunate, and especially if you live in the state of Victoria, because the state government set up a royal commission into the Victorian mental health system because it wasn't working. And this is the connection between your mental health and social connections. So the mental health inquiry changed the model for mental health in the state of Victoria, and the report, which you can access online, came out with 65 recommendations. Now, they talked about training and research, but the two things that I took out of that report, one is that mental health is to be managed in local communities. And the second thing that I took out of that report is a thing called social prescribing. Now, I had never heard of it before, but it is very important, especially for people who may have already left the workforce and are feeling isolated. And I was fortunate enough to be able to be part of this in a semi-rural municipality on the edge of Melbourne, the Shire of Cardinia. And social prescribing works in a very simple way. There's a lot of work involved, but it is happening now. This is the preventative side of the mental health model. So out in the Shire of Cardinia, the Shire has a team called the Ageing Well team, and they have some trained volunteers. This is how it works. So they have partnered with a local GP clinic, and I'll pretend that I'm Mary and that I live in the Shire of Cardinia and that I have left the workforce. I've been a nurse for decades. I'm a bit tired, exhausted, so I choose to retire. I go home, I shut the front door, and I turn on the telly. No one comes knocking on the door saying, Mary, would you like to do this or would you like to do that? And after a while, I'm beginning to feel a bit isolated, and I'm starting to take more notice about my own health now. So I start to go up to the local GP clinic and say, Doc, oh, look, I've got this sore neck. And we get that organised. In a few weeks' time, I'm back at the GP clinic, and this time, oh, Doc, I've got, see this cut, and the GP clinic acknowledges and realises that Mary is feeling isolated, that she is sitting in her property watching telly far too much in the daytime. And so they, instead of giving her an antidepressant or a pill or a potion of some sort, they do what they call social prescribing. So the GP clinic gets in touch with the Ageing Well team, and one of the volunteers is introduced to Mary, and Mary and the volunteer sit down, have a cup of tea, get to know each other a little bit, and the volunteer gradually integrates Mary back into her local community. She asks Mary, what is it you'd really like to do with your time now? So Mary might choose to join the gardening group, the watercolour class, or learn how to play card games. And eventually Mary is integrated back into the local community, and she has avoided that trap of falling into depression or anxiety. So that's what's happening now. And if we have enough courage to face up to those face-to-face interactions, we might be a shy person, but it's a great idea if you get in touch with your local municipality and see what they've got in terms of community groups. I know that the municipality I live in, I was surprised at how many resources they had. Resources like a U3A, a community learning centre, or it could also be a sense of community created down at local libraries. So start exploring what's available near where you live, and make some connections there. You can also connect online, of course, and a good one that I came across is it's a setup especially to offset loneliness, and it's stitch.net. And it's been set up for people, married people, single people, and it's the idea behind stitch.net is that you can choose to create a social event, or you can choose to just attend a social event that will be not too far from where you live. There is a monthly fee or an annual fee for that, but it's connecting with real people in real time. And let me just finish off by sharing a couple of people that I've helped. Now, I mentioned Gary the golfer. Gary had a successful career as a lawyer, and he decided to retire at 65 years of age. So he did that in the November of one year, and by March the following year, he was talking to me because things were not working out very well at home. He was feeling lost in his own home. His wife had retired 5 years earlier, and she had her routines and her retirement activities all humming along nicely. And every time she went out the door, Gary the golfer used to say, "When will you be back? When will you be home?" And she was finding it difficult managing having a husband under her feet. So now, why did I call him Gary the golfer? Because in sharing his retirement plans, he said, "Oh, look, retirement is all about playing golf 3 times a week." And that was fabulous because he was out there socializing, he was getting some exercise. But what about all those other hours in the week? And that's what the problem was. And it turned out that they, as a couple, were carrying a whole load of grief from a son who had predeceased them. And they had lost that connection and ability to be able to communicate without emotions flaring up. So we spent a little bit of time working out what was it that Gary really wanted to say to his wife. What were the words he would choose? Gary chose the right time to share that retirement dream of his, which was to move interstate, to live near their surviving son and his expanding family. So after a short time, Gary rang me one day and he said, "Estelle, I don't need you anymore." And it made my heart sing because he had been able to sit down, have a conversation with his wife without too much emotion, too many emotions flaring up. And before they knew it, the house was on the market. They'd sold up. They moved interstate. The deal was that they had to come back to their home city of Melbourne every 6 months so that his wife could check in with their son's grave and they could catch up with their friends and family. And Carl, have I got time for Janet and Steve as well?
Yes, keep going.
Okay, just lastly, I'll share with you Janet and Steve. Now they had planned their transition to retirement, and it was all moving along really nicely until they actually followed their plan of moving out of the city. They had bought a beautiful country property that was their dream retirement place to be. So they had both stopped full-time work. They were both now working part-time, and they had moved to the country. Now for Steve, it was a real challenge because Steve said, "I used to get out of bed in the morning and go to work for my children." Their children had all grown up and were now able to be independent and look after themselves. So that was Steve's challenge, was what is going to be his next purpose in life? He was still working part-time, but it was just a mundane sort of thing to him. He had to rediscover his new purpose in life. And as for Janet, well, her plans had gone accordingly. She was just working part-time. She was feeling so cut off from their adult children and their friends that they'd left behind in the city. And Janet hadn't, or Steve, they hadn't connected to their new community, the local community. Janet told me she wasn't crafty, so she didn't want to join any craft groups that were in the local community. She wasn't sure what she was going to do. She knew that in the free time that she had now, that she wanted to give back, but she hadn't found a way to do it as yet. Anyway, after a little bit of work together, Janet and Steve started to go down to the local restaurant every Thursday night and began to meet some local people and make some connections down there. So they're just a couple of the people that I have helped. And just going back to where we began, when I think about the possibility for me in my retirement, it is going to be so different from my paternal grandparents' retirement. But I can tell you, it's a great time of life. So thank you very much for listening. And I'm really interested to hear some questions that you might have. Thanks, Carl.
Thanks, Estelle. That was great. I'm sure those that have listened today have found that very useful, especially when planning for the next phase in your life can be a bit daunting when you don't know what's going to happen. But people have taken that path before, so there's always learnings to share.
Absolutely.
Just a reminder that, as Estelle has pointed out, yes, there is a one-page handout that we'll be sending around to everyone that's registered following the session, which sort of contains notes summarizing the key points raised today. So you have something tangible in your hand and you can forward that to your friends and family who need it. The session is being recorded, so if you have joined late, you can always watch the start of it online through our YouTube channel. It'll be posted. This video will be posted to our YouTube channel following the session. We'll jump into Q&A now, and we'll start off with Estelle. I think, and actually, you've actually covered off some of the questions that have already been asked by email, but there's still a few to go. So we'll just go through those first, and then we'll jump over to the questions raised by participants in the meeting, in the session.
Sure.
The first one that I want to ask you, Estelle, is in relation to, so one person has asked us cost of living. Right? I think we all know the cost of living is changing. We're all feeling the pinch now. What are your thoughts on how that impacts people's decision to retire? What are your thoughts on how that sort of impacts that decision process?
Yeah, it's a very relevant question because it just was revealed recently that in the last 2 years, there've been about a 250,000 Australians who have returned to the workforce, and a high percentage, it's up to nearly 30%, I think, of those are aged 55 years plus. So I suspect that it mostly applies to white collar workers. And when you think about it, you know, if you're a blue collar worker, your body probably gives out a little bit sooner than if you are sitting in an office working rather than out on the tools. But yes, there is a fairly large proportion of people returning to the workforce that are in the older age category. And we now have, here in Australia, we now have the highest retirement age that we've had since the 1970s. And I'm sure that the cost of living is driving that, that people are afraid that their superannuation won't be enough to last them the lifetime, because none of us know when our last day is going to be. And often in speaking with people about retirement, the first concern, the first worry they have is about money. And I can understand that because we don't know how long it's got to last. And but look, I talk to financial planners a fair bit, and they all say, have a plan. Not even they can tell you whether the financial plan is going to be a good one or not, but a plan is better than no plan.
That's great. Yeah. And just as a reminder, if you do have any questions about from a financial advice perspective or how working part-time might impact your super or tax obligations, please do consult an applicable professional on those points so you can get the right advice. The next question that we've got is around working part-time as you sort of ease into fully retiring, or you might continue to do that for as long as you like. What are your thoughts on how one should go about thinking what is the ideal part-time workload? You know, should they just cut it in half, or of course it all suits the individual, but how do you ensure that the person's asking, how can I ensure that I'm detaching myself from work without taking too long before then I might never retire, and I might just be still working in some shape or form.
Well, Carl, would you believe there's a term called never tiree, and there are people who that's what they want to do. They choose to never retire. So, but to answer the question, it's a very good one, but it is a very individual choice. I know that, it is exhausting at times after you've worked for decades, and you're really looking forward for a change, and you might not be sure what that change is going to be, and dropping to part-time is often a way to go. But as I illustrated with the Janet and Steve case study, that can still bring up challenges. And look, the only other thing that I can share is my personal experience. I was a teacher, and I was burnt out, really. And I chose to drop from full-time to 0.8. And honestly, in preparing the class for that teacher who came in for that 1 day a week when I wasn't there, that was worse in a way than me actually turning up to do the job myself. So think about your situation. What are there other supports that you can bring into your life, other resources that you might already have around you to support you in your work life? The best thing might be to sit down with the people that you live with, who are the significant people in your life, and share your idea with them. They might have some way of supporting you in working and dropping from full-time to part-time, but it certainly is one pathway to full retirement. There's so many different ways you can choose to go.
Definitely, it's not a linear path, and it's you to ensure that it sort of suits what you want to achieve as well, right? You can't mirror yourself on someone else. It's all about what you want to achieve.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right.
Estelle, we have a question about you mentioned stitch.net, and there's a few other sort of resources you mentioned, but if someone does want to, volunteer, do you have any recommendations for good databases or, directories where they can go to sort of find places to volunteer and meet other people?
If you want to volunteer, the first thing I would try to do would be to find an organisation where your values align with their values. You might be interested in animals, you might be interested in gardening. So those sort of organisations are always looking for volunteers. I was once a Rotarian. That's a volunteer organisation, that's worldwide. That can take you lots of different places that you might never expect to go. Yeah, look, there must be. I'm just wondering if there is a website where you can Google volunteer organisations in Australia. And you're sure to find something that's of interest to you, whether you be into motorsport or horse riding, or creating beautiful pieces of sculpture. Yeah, there's got to be something out there for you. The thing I find myself saying to people is just start asking the questions. Ask someone that you believe might be able to help you. Look for a person who has possibly been on this journey a bit before you. And in terms of volunteering, keep your ears open to conversations that you hear about you. And you might hear someone talking about, when I was down at this or that organisation the other day, I was doing this or that. So yeah, it's a case of you keeping your eyes open and keeping your ears open, as well as getting those fingers moving across the keyboard and doing some
That's right.
searching there.
And it's always important to stay active and keep a lookout for any opportunity that you can take.
Yeah.
We have another question around retiring at 60 and then using your super until 67 and then potentially relying on the age pension beyond that. What are your views on that sort of strategy, and is that a common one that you come across when you're talking to your clients?
As I said, I talk to financial planners, and
Mm.
they are the people with the expertise to help with a question like that. And I would really encourage the person who asked that question to make contact with a professional, a licensed financial advisor, and you will be surprised, or I hope that you'll be surprised at the facts that they have at their fingertips, and that they will be able to inform you about your situation. I'm happy to talk about money, but I'm not a licensed financial advisor, so I don't give financial advice in that way, but I just strongly encourage people to seek financial advice from someone they trust, whether it's their accountant, whether it's a financial planner, or Uncle Fred, who worked in the finance industry for years. Start asking questions of people that you trust when it comes to your finances.
Yeah, we do have a few other questions actually about this point, around sort of, how much super do you need to have before you can claim pensions and the like. So I think to those questions that we have received, please do ensure that you ask a financial advisor.
Look, Carl, the other thing that is freely available to any Australian citizen on financial advice is Centrelink. They have the financial information officers, and they give you the facts. They are not there to tell you this type of investment or that type of investment, but they can tell you all the information about finances, and whether you are eligible for the age pension. A very good resource that we have, and that you ring the Centrelink number, and when it's answered, you ask to speak to a FIS, a Financial Information Service Officer.
Yeah.
And there's no charge for that.
Yes, yeah. No, there are a variety of resources, even on community sort of organisation websites, and even the ATO's website as well has helpful information. But you should always double check what you read, and if you do want to get advice to sort of qualify what you have read, do consider it, because it is a complex area and something that you need to get right, because it's all based on your personal circumstances. There's no sort of one size fits all answer to those types of questions.
Yeah, that's so true.
And this brings us to our last question, Estelle, which is around social connection, which you talked about. This person has asked that, as they've become older, they've, becoming friendly and more engaged sort of becomes a bit difficult for them. What are some sort of key tips that you can share for that person to maybe change from being an introvert to an extrovert, or just engaging with individuals more? It sort of becomes difficult, right? Because you're not at work, you don't see the same group of people, you don't maybe socialize with the same groups of people that you might have done in the past when you had children younger on, So what are some key tips that you can share?
Take tiny steps, and one little step at a time. So your goal is to connect with other people. So what might be the first little step that you would take? For some people, it might be getting out the front door. For other people, it's beyond that. So have a think about what you've got at the moment in terms of your social connections. And if there's someone in that circle that you would really trust sharing your information with, ask someone to walk along beside you. If you might walk past the bowling club every day of the week and think, oh, I'd love to be able to play bowls, but I'm too shy to go in and ask. If you are too shy to go in and front up, ask someone to go with you, someone who can just be there beside you while you find the information that you are after. The only other advice I can think of giving is that you have to be really, really brave sometimes in your life and get out there and, just go for it. Even at, as we age, we've still got permission to go for it. So,
That's right. No, you should never feel afraid of asking questions or just putting your
right.
next foot forward, right?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Estelle. That was great. So if you have any further questions for Estelle, feel free to get in touch with her. She's of Desire to Retire. She's a retirement life coach. So I've been very grateful to have her tonight, sharing some very important information about planning for retirement, sorry. And that brings us to the end of the session. So, as a reminder, again, the session is being recorded. So if you have missed any part of it, you can watch it online on our YouTube channel following today's session. And there'll be a one-page handout shared to register participants by email. So look out for that in your inbox. Please also follow us on our social media pages so that you can stay in touch and look out for any other session that might be of interest to you. We offer a wide range of sessions on various topics because we want to help people make good decisions. So we're not limiting it to any particular topic. We want to capture as many topics as possible. Our next session is in July, and it'll be covering how to improve productivity and efficiency in your business. If you're a business owner, stay tuned for that session on the 19th of July, which is a Wednesday. And that's about it, really. Thank you again, Estelle, for your time.
Carl, can I just make one little point before we sign off?
Of course.
With the email address, Retirement Life, some people get confused as to whether it's an O or a 0. Retirement Life 0. That's the slide. Yes, I've only just picked that up. Some people might think that it's an O.
Oh, yes. Retirement Life, the number 0.
The number 0.
At gmail.com.
Yeah.
That's Retirement Life, the number 0 at gmail.com. Yep.
Yeah. Thanks, Carl.
No worries, Estelle. All right. Well, thank you all for attending, and thank you, Estelle, again. And have a good night.
Thanks, Carl. Bye for now.